Welcome. I'm Professor Owen Anderson, and in this lecture, we're looking at the occult and New Age in American culture as part of studying world religion. Now, I want to start by just kind of broadening it, the occult and New Age, or just the occult in world history, because we're looking at religions not just limited to United States history, but in order to make it relevant and especially show how it's still very active, it helps to show how it's been influential in American culture, even currently still. And so, just by way of introduction, what is the occult? Well, the word occult simply means hidden or esoteric, hidden knowledge or practices, secret things. And so you'll hear people kind of interested in that sort of thing. Like there's this secret thing I found out about how aliens built the pyramids. And that intrigues people. They want to know about the hidden. It's in contrast to what is plain or clear. So, for example, it often defines itself in contrast to God. God is clearly revealed as the creator of the world, and he's clearly given scriptures about how to be redeemed, the Bible. But this path says, but there's secrets that were left out, and I happen to know them, and I'll teach them to you. And it almost always has to do with how to contact demons or the dead or leave your body or know the future, something like that. That's not in the Bible. In fact, you're told in the Bible, don't do those things. So they'll say, well, no, but I know how to. And that's the occult or secret side of religion. But I don't want you to get the wrong impression. It's not just that there's the right hand and the left hand. They say that sometimes as if this is just the inverse of that. No, this is the occult is a whole interpretation of what that is. So, for example, it'll many times say there were two beings, God and darkness, and we're following darkness. They're both eternal. So it rejects theism. It definitely rejects the Bible, but it might use some biblical terms. And it usually puts God as like one God, the God, the creator, one God among many who created lesser beings who they created our world. And so it says we can't really have access to God, the creator. Instead, we can have access to the ones just above us. And we can ask them for help with the ultimate goal of our souls reincarnating and climbing that ladder to become more and more divine. Now, it's related to, but not the same as, the New Age, which is a spiritual movement in the mid 20th century to the present, based on combining certain pieces of Eastern religions and the occult into this thing called New Age, which focuses on personal transformation through things like meditating to release stress. But it's meditating in the Eastern sense of clearing your mind of all thought and leaving it open to the suggestion of other spirits. And so that's where it's in the occult side of meditating, in contrast to King David in the Psalms, who says, I meditate on God's law. And so it often incorporates these yoga practices, mindfulness practices, and even some kinds of alchemy or health benefits from mixing different things together into a thing called New Age, which then often becomes very consumeristic. It gets marketed to the American consumer as the healthy choice or taking care of yourself. It's you time, and you need to pay me $100 to have me do this kind of a yoga practice with you. And so we'll see that when we look at American culture, how interesting it is, how it still became commercialized. But it's also not consistent to the religions. It will combine religions who they would say we're not compatible. Like Hinduism and Buddhism have been at war. And the Americans will say, no, I got you. Let's put these ideas together and make our own thing called New Age. And I think you can still go. I mean, there aren't really a lot of so-called bookstores or record stores, really not record stores. I don't know if you've even heard of what those are, but there's a few bookstores left. And you would go into one of these and you'd go and you'd look at different sections like history, finance, and there'd be a section called New Age. Sometimes it's called metaphysics. And that means the same thing in this context. And you look at New Age, and it's books like this, what I just said, or it's music like Kenny G or Enya, which you're supposed to play while you transcendentally meditate. So you'll see New Age in corporate settings quite often. And it's generally about leaving behind yourself, overcoming the ego and death to the ego death, and just becoming one with reality. So let me put that here. It's philosophical monism. All is one, all is eternal. And your problems come up when you think you exist as your own thing created by God. No, no, then you'll suffer. You have to overcome your ego and just forget you exist. And so this is an important topic in our current setting because you can see how it affects American spirituality still and cultural history in the last 60, 70 years. So let's look at a little bit of sort of ancient mystery religions. Going back to the Eleusinian mysteries, these are the peoples in Italy before the Romans or just north of the Romans. And we don't know a lot about them because we don't have a lot of writing. But we do know from other sources about their being involved in these mystery religion and sort of the beginning, this idea. And the mystery religions teach that there's plain truths all around you. And those might include that God made the world, that you need to be redeemed. But there's real truth that's secret. And if you go through the right initiations, you can be initiated into the mystery. And the mystery almost always turns out to be that God is evil. And there's another being who has different names. Sometimes the name is Lucifer. And Lucifer is actually the good one who's going to free you from God, who wants to enslave you. And so you have to follow the path of Lucifer and that God. And so this is also known as Dionysian revelries, because once you follow that other path, we'll say the path of Lucifer, then there's two ways to do it. The Apollinarian way, which is the path of wisdom and righteousness, but you're doing it for Lucifer. Or there's the Dionysian way, which is the way of unbridled passions. I mean, is done with orgies, drinking, and sex. And those go together sometimes in this sense. In an interesting way, the Dionysian has two kinds. One kind says, that's the good life. Just let your passions go and enjoy the Saturnalia. But the other side says, and this could be kind of the Apollinarian justifying getting into it, well, no, that's not good to be that way, but we have that pent up in us. And so sometimes you just have to let it out to purge the evil from you and just let that stuff come out of you. And you see some hints of that still today when people say, I got to be true to me, sexually speaking, and just be what is inside of me. And because it's bad to pent it up, to repress it causes problems. So you have this going back very ancient, and these themes of secrecy, initiation, and transcendental knowledge, meaning knowledge that's not the ordinary sort of thing everyone else knows, because it feels very good to be part of the inside group. We know secret stuff. And so they stay secret. One of the reasons is because it's easily refuted by reason. You can show the Dionysian revelries, the mystery religion, the teaching about Lucifer are irrational, incoherent. They contradict themselves. How can God, who made all things and who's the one who gives being and is therefore good, and any law God gives is for our good, how can he be evil? That's inconsistent. So that Lucifer story doesn't even make sense. But that's why they'll stay secret, because they don't want to have exposure to public debate. So they keep it secret. And they also keep it secret in plain view. So a very big thing for the mysteries is using symbolism that you get other people to adopt. And you'll see occult symbolism all around you once you know how to pick it out. It's hiding in plain sight, so to speak. They get the other people to use their symbolism. It's a kind of power that my symbol is everywhere, but they don't even know what it is. And so you'll see those themes continue to later esoteric traditions. Sometimes it's called the Hermetic tradition after Hermes Trismegistus, a fictional wizard who supposedly wrote down the secrets of alchemy. And so the Hermetic tradition is that tradition seeking contact with spirits in order to learn secret knowledge. But you also see it in something called Gnosticism, which just means in Greek knowledge. It's a secret knowledge idea. And this was brought up and made popular by what's his name? Bart Ehrman, who wrote a book, The Gnostic Gospels. And his claim was that Christians and Jews, but especially Christians, because they're the ones that put the whole Bible together, not just the Torah, left some books out called the Gnostic Gospels, which teach you secret truths that they didn't want you to know. So you see the theme of secret knowledge. And what are those secret truths? Well, it's that same idea. There's a duality of being, God and then his shadow, or Lucifer, various names, and they're in conflict eternally. So it starts off denying theism. And that's why I said it's not just the reverse of theism. It denies theism's true, but then it uses some like Bible words or Christian words in there. But it's dualistic. Matter is evil, and Yahweh is the God of matter. But there's a good spirit who will free us from the bonds of the physical and teach us how to be freed from our body. So you can see how, in an interesting way, it's the Lucifer story from Genesis 1 through 3, where Lucifer is the good guy. Death was imposed on mankind in Genesis 3 as a callback from sin. In other words, you should repent to God. But what this does is says, we're going to find a way around repenting and a way around death by claiming that material existence itself is evil. And the best thing is to just be a spirit. Don't even try to have a body. And the worst thing the Gnostic could have is a resurrection of the dead, which is what Christians teach, that the dead will be raised and their body and soul will be united. No, no, no. We just want to be spirits, floating spirits, not material. And that taps into some deep themes in Greek philosophy. Plato and Aristotle were dualists like that who thought material existence is evil. So Plato and Aristotle aren't like precursors to the Christians, although some Christian thinkers thought that way and tried to combine them. And so that's why the Gnostic Gospels were not in the Bible, because they're denying theism. It'd be like saying, why not put an atheist book in the Bible? Put a dualistic book in the Bible? Well, because it's inconsistent with the rest of the Bible. It's not based on a conspiracy or a secret thing or a hidden, I want to hide these truths. Well, if the Bible's true, those books can't be true. So why would you put them in there? And so you see the influence of Gnosticism on, it was a movement that kind of died out in the 200s, conflicting with early Christians, but you still see it in mystical and occult currents and New Age teaching, that I want to be freed from the body, to be a pure spirit. And then I mentioned Hermeticism, Hermes Trismegistus, the thrice blessed, and Neoplatonism, which develops around that same time, around, say, the 300s, 400s. And the idea with Neoplatonism is to take Greek philosophy and give it this occult edge. It teaches that all is one, the one, and then out of the one come two things and more things. And that's that spiritual hierarchy. And we want to climb the ladder of being back to the one and be united to the one. And so Neoplatonism was specifically set up to be a counter against Christianity. For example, Julian the Apostate, he became emperor and outlawed Christianity again. It had been briefly made the law of the land. He outlawed it and tried to put Neoplatonism in its place. So the understanding here is, and that goes to the Gnostic point, the understanding between Christians and Gnostics was these aren't the same thing. Of course, you won't put Gnostic Gospels in the Bible. And so you have this little things, microcosm of, let's say, Neoplatonism in the 300 or 400s, but the macrocosm of this theme continues even to the present day. And so the occult is very, is a combination, a synthesis of things which may not be consistent, which is why I said it tends to avoid public debate because it will be shown to be incoherent. But it will combine things that sound sciencey with things that are magical, and then things that are spiritual. So you'll meet people who say, well, I'm not religious, I'm spiritual. Well, this is what they're talking about. This is the lecture about that. And what they mean is, I don't follow specifically, they mean Christianity usually. They don't usually say that in the context of Islam. They say, I don't follow any of the denominations of Christianity. I'm spiritual. Or they mean organized religion. So that could include Islam, but still, it's usually still organized Christianity. So someone might say, I'm a Christian. I just don't go to a church. I do my own spirituality. And then when you look into what they do, it's very often Christian words for occult meanings or Hermetic tradition meanings, Gnostic meanings. So this is an important part of the occult tradition is it kind of takes from different places to fit into something that has something of interest for everybody. Now, let's get into the American setting, the 1900s. Although people tend to say the old days they were Christians, like, oh yeah, back in the 1800s, that's when Americans were Christians. Well, yeah, I mean there was a lot of Christianity. It was very public and it influenced public and the government in ways that we don't see today. But there was important occult traditions or movements starting up in the 1800s that continue to the present. One example is secret societies. Now, these were older than America. For example, Masons were older. I mean, if you talk to the Masons, they say they go all the way back right to Solomon. But even if you just trace them back to maybe Enlightenment Scotland, that's still older than the Americans. But you'll see that the rituals and symbolism and the idea of spiritual progression up the ladder of being and the one at the top. Well, that's all Neoplatonism or occultic teachings, but they put it into their story, which is that Solomon taught this because Solomon was able, through his wisdom, to have contact with the spirit realm, and he got secret knowledge. He wrote down his public stuff in the Proverbs and Ecclesiastes, but he wrote down secret stuff that he got from these spirits he talked to. And the Knights Templar during the Crusades found that stuff and they brought it back. And they've ever since then been persecuted by the Roman Catholics or whoever it is because they know the secrets that Solomon taught. And so that's the idea of the specifics of Freemasonry. But you'll see it uses occult symbolism that other movements use, and it's very public and very common. A lot of what you see on the dollar bill, I mean, no one doubts this. This is not like a shocking news, but the dollar bill contains these symbols of the unfinished pyramid with the pyramid cap of the one seen, all seen eye being put on it. Or theosophy was very popular, made popular by Madame Blavatsky. And you'll see intellectuals that read this and liked. I mean, they say that on Einstein's desk, he had a big copy of Madame Blavatsky's Theosophy. This is Einstein, right, the leader of science. But people like this idea there's something secret. And what she did was she was the wife of a Russian general, and that Russian general was stationed throughout Eastern Russia or parts of East Asia. And she would go with him and she would look into the secret traditions of that part of the world, looking for the original teaching. And she blended that with some of her Russian orthodoxy outside. She wasn't consistently a Russian Orthodox, but she combined it with that some pieces of Christianity and Western occultism to come up with theosophy, which is again just this teaching that it actually started with a Swedish guy, Swedenborg, who said that God spoke to him and he wrote down everything God was saying. There's these long books of all these dreams or visions he was having and the information God was giving him. And it all comes down to we can, through these practices, connect with higher spiritual beings who then lead us into how to become gods ourselves. And sometimes, maybe somewhat often, going back up to the Dionysian revelries, it involves sexual magic, the power of sex and sexuality and sexual rituals that get you to become a higher being somehow. And so you almost always see, on the one hand, the biblical tradition of marriage is between a man and a woman in which is contained sex. And then denying that leads to not just it leads to other sexual behaviors, but it explicitly wants those to contradict the creator's laws. We'll do it a different way. They say man and woman, will do it differently, even up to, like I said, orgies or something. And then you also see in the 1800s in America, spiritualism and seances, contacting the dead. And this is when haunted houses became a thing. So the Fox sisters had, in their house, there was knocking, but no one was around it. Like there's no one there on this side or that side of the wall, but I hear. So they said this was the dead communicating with them. It became a very famous, and there's been movies about that. But whenever you watch a scary movie about a haunting, it's usually from this time period, either in the United States or America, because it became really interesting contacting the dead. And that's a fascinating phenomenon in American history because, again, the influence of Christianity, but it's clearly contrary to whether it's the Old Testament or the New Testament, Judaism or Christianity, both say don't contact the dead. That's called necromancy. And it's always bad for you. There's only one instance in the Bible where it happened. King Saul went to a medium to contact the prophet Samuel and was rebuked. Whether it was Samuel that showed up or another spirit saying it was Samuel, Saul was rebuked and then shortly died. There's no good instances in the Bible of contacting the dead. And that's part of the point when I said whether it was Samuel or a spirit impersonating Samuel, the seances say we're going to contact your dead uncle and we'll ask him questions. Well, how do you know it's the dead uncle? It could be the seance leader tricking you. They're a grifter, and it's like a magic trick. What if they are contacting a spirit, but it's an evil spirit? They don't tell the truth. So they'll say, hi, I'm your uncle. And if your uncle's dead, maybe they've talked to your uncle, so they know things that your uncle knew and can tell you. And so you got this interesting thing of I want to go to a medium who has the gift. It's even called, like, it's a good thing, the gift to talk to the dead. And you got to learn how to do that. I mean, you might have a gift, but you got to cultivate it by learning the rituals and the secrets. And so it became popular in some circles to hold seances as a social / quasi-religious event. Like you say, hey, come over to dinner, and then we're going to do a seance. And you'll have famous people involved in this, like Lincoln's wife held seances to contact their dead son. So it's often a person who's grieving, who won't accept death and says, I don't care what God says about death. I want to talk to my loved one, and I'm going to contact whatever spirit I need to make it happen. Or Houdini. Houdini and his mom, I guess, had a secret code to try to get around grifters. So if it was her, she'd say this word that they agreed on. And after she died, he went to mediums, but none of them knew that word. So he knew they were all faking it when they said they contacted her. But again, I think if there are demons, couldn't they have overheard you and your mom talking? So that even if they get the right word, it's not from your mom. And then you had an interest also in just occult practices like astrology. Even today in our newspaper, leading newspapers like the New York Times, it says it's only prints what's fit to print, has a horoscope in it. And the horoscope tells you, based on what your sign is, personal guidance. So in other words, you get guidance based on what the stars are doing, depending on when you were born. Or fortune telling and tarot card reading. You can pay for those. Most cities have a place that has a sign out. You can go and you pay somebody, and they tell your fortune with tarot cards or maybe your palm or dice, bones, something. Palmistry I have on there too. Your palm being read, or numerology, numbers, magic and numbers. And so let me add one more piece here. D, magic. So bold. Two kinds. So personal and impersonal. Right. So personal means, I don't know if I should do it again. Yeah. Personal. You contact a spirit who then does things for you. Or impersonal, you learn the ritual or words to say to have something happen. Sometimes they're related, like you learn the words to say that make a spirit do what you want. But for example, in Harry Potter, it seems to be impersonal magic. You're not contacting any spirits. You're just saying some weird, some mistaken Latin, and then something happens. And that's more like alchemy. It's like pre-modern science in one sense. It simply didn't work. And so science was invented. But it all revolves around, and then the personal would just be contacting a familiar spirit. They always present themselves as good. Hey, I'm here to help you. I'm your familiar spirit, your guardian angel. Well, it might be a demon tricking you as well. How would you know? They want to lead you down that path with good things. And they say something positive to keep you going, but they have ultimately bad intentions for you. And you can kind of know that ahead of time, in that God said, don't do it. And so what is, well, it's a superstition, which is, you could say anything is superstition if you don't understand it. An ancient person might look at a cell phone and say, whoa, that's magic. But no, this isn't that. Superstition means the belief that if you do something taboo, then a bad thing will happen to you. Or if you have a special object, then a good thing will happen to you. So you might have an amulet you wear, and whenever you wear it, you have a great game of golf. But when you don't wear it, you don't do well. Well, that's a superstition. That's based on faulty causal reasoning. After this, therefore, because of this, I wore an amulet. I had a great game of golf. Therefore, great games of golf are caused by amulets. Well, it's not how it works. At the very best, it's psychosomatic, but probably not even that. You can probably still explain it some other way. So it's always based on not understanding reality and instead using a couple appearances. I did good at golf. I drank this lotion or potion and then I got better. Or I drank this potion and I fell in love. But it doesn't survive actual examination and repetition, which is a scientific method. So it's not just that anything counts as magic if you don't understand it. No, you can understand the cell phone and see how that's based on electronic science. So those things said, 20th century figures. This now, not all of them are American, but they're involved in the New Age explosion. Aleister Crowley's coming just after or overlapping with Madame Blavatsky. And he's very well known in pop culture occultism as the most evil man alive. He liked that. He believed he was the reincarnation of Osiris. And he started a secret society, the Golden Dawn, which tried to do Egyptian religion. Now, they got it wrong. They didn't know what it really was. They were just guessing from some books they had or misunderstood. But they also brought in sexual things. So it was that Dionysian side. And the secret society, Thelema, which had as its main rule, do what thou wilt. And the Satanic Bible has that in it. Do what thou wilt is the whole of the law. The only law is any way you want it, that's the way you need it. God says there's 10 rules, and maybe more than that. The truth is there's only one. Do whatever you want. And so he had this bringing back this kind of idea of ceremonial magic and the importance of that in counterculture. So I'm dissatisfied with the main culture. I don't see a way to address those things. So I'll get involved in the counterculture, which involves the occult practices. And one of the main cultural things is, as I said, for example, sex, marriage is sex between a man and a woman. Counterculture will have other sexualities to combat that. And he believed he was, like I said, the reincarnation of Osiris, and taught this idea of reincarnation. And that'll come up in a minute here. Aldous Huxley, who was an intellectual, British intellectual, these are both English. But Aldous Huxley started off with the intellect. The intellect is what will solve us in the materialistic sense. Christianity, all those religions are fake. We just need to apply our intellect to pragmatism and materialism, and we'll produce a perfect world. And that didn't happen. Even within his own life, he saw that. And so he became increasingly more dystopian. He wrote the book Brave New World. And then he wrote the book The Doors of Perception, because what he said was the intellect failed us. So we need to broaden our perception and open the doors of perception through drug use, through mystical experiences brought on by psychedelic drugs, to experience what else is out there and these other beings that talk to you when you're on these trips. And so he influenced that countercultural psychedelic spirituality of the 1960s. You should notice, if you know about rock and roll, the Doors of Perception. Well, wait, the Doors? Yeah. Jim Morrison read The Doors of Perception while he was a philosophy student at UCLA. He dropped out, never finished, but started the band The Doors with the idea that you listen to psychedelic rock while you're on LSD or whatever it is, and that makes you have contact with highest reality. Now, that was also overlapping with Timothy Leary, who was one time professor at Harvard. And he taught the countercultural motto: turn on, which means you get it. Today we might say be woke. You wake up to what's the world is like. You tune in, you see what's really going on, the oppressor oppressed dynamic, and you drop out. Counterculture. I'm not participating in that. I'm dropping out of the culture in order to do what? Well, he developed or was part of developing LSD to bring about, is a chemical version of what you might get from a mushroom, to bring about altered states to get those religious experiences. So it's overlapping here with what Aldous Huxley did, and what a lot of the ancient religions that Madame Blavatsky looked into, where'd she go? She's up here somewhere, was doing, using mushrooms or other kinds of psychedelic foods that have that effect on you. So you have these experiences. And so he recommended LSD as a way to remember past lives. He believed he was the reincarnation of Aleister Crowley. And he was just teaching the same things Aleister Crowley did. And interestingly, you'll see a picture of Aleister Crowley on the Beatles, who are coming up in a minute, on their Sgt. Pepper album. There's a group of people, and one of them is Karl Marx, interesting, and one of them is Aldous Huxley. And they're part of this counterculture movement, which is against Western Christianity, in favor of drug use, dropping out, experiencing this psychedelic thing. And when Aldous Huxley was dying, he and his wife were reading Timothy Leary's commentary on the Egyptian Book of the Dead. And Aldous Huxley was very, very anxious as he's getting closer to death. And he asked his wife, give me a shot of LSD. And then she says, then he was very peaceful and he died peacefully. Well, yeah, I mean, he overdosed on the LSD. It made him calmer, dead, because he couldn't face death without altering his consciousness. So those are some of the main kind of intellectual figures of the movement in the 20th century, leading especially to the 1960s counterculture. You'll instantly, you'll hear, I'm going to forget his name now. Ozzy Osbourne would chant Aleister Crowley at his concerts and invoke the spirit of Aleister Crowley to come onto the crowd, or maybe even possess him while he's giving his concert. Now, Ozzy Osbourne's kind of a performer. You know, did he believe this stuff or not? He made a lot of money saying he did, but you don't always know at that level. But at this level, these guys, they were committed to this. And then you have the occult in contemporary pop culture, many different ways. A and B might be out of order. For example, the Beatles, which I just mentioned, the Sgt. Pepper album, you see this great transformation in their presentation from when they were on TV in America for the first time with a suit and they all had the same haircut. And then here they look like what they used to call hippies. They'd gone to India because they saw the emptiness of Western materialism. And they're right about that. Just left by itself, materialism here means consumerism, and it is very empty. It doesn't give you ultimate happiness. But they lumped in Christianity with that. All of that is empty. On top of that, they might say, all of that just gave us World War I, World War II wars. And what happened after World War II was the Eastern religions repackaged themselves for the Western audience as the peaceful alternative. So yeah, you guys had World War I and World War II. Wouldn't you like to stop having wars? We're peaceful over here. Now, that's not the truth. They may not have started World War I and World War II, but when you look into their history, you see they were at each other's throat as well. They had tons of wars. And, you especially look at Japan's involvement in World War II. But even when we look at Hinduism or Buddhism or Taoism. And so they successfully said, no, we're peaceful, compared to what Europe just went through. And people were sick of world wars. And they said, yeah, I don't want that ever again. Understandable. And so they didn't want consumerism, didn't want wars, looked to the East, went to the East to find enlightenment. And so, for example, George Harrison wrote the song Hare Krishna He starts off by saying Hallelujah, and then it shifts into saying Hare Krishna. You're worshiping the Hindu god Krishna. And in an interview, he said he did that on purpose to get Christians singing the song because they'll start with Hallelujah about Yahweh, and then he has them singing to Krishna. And they wanted this change to Eastern religions. Now, I said at the beginning of the lecture that this New Age stuff is not consistent. I mean, you can't take a little bit here, a little bit from Hinduism, a little bit from Buddhism, and put it together. Those are different systems that have been at odds for centuries. Let alone Hinduism is difficult to take out because it has the caste system into which you're born as part of karma. And so they connected with the Hare Krishna movement, which denied the caste system. And it's not as popular anymore. You don't hear a lot about Hare Krishna movement, but it's very popular then in the 60s and 70s. And this idea of the search for more, just like Aldous Huxley. My mind failed me, so I want this mystical experience. And then in pop culture today, let's go back up to Disney. You'll see this in Disney and other children's media. It's interesting how it's pushed at children. I mean, most children's movies are about magic and the mystical, and they have alchemical symbolism. It's very rare you'll see anything other than that. And it's almost just expected. Like if you saw one that had like a children's movie not like that, you'd be surprised. And they say, well, there was the Joseph in Egypt movie cartoon 20 years ago, and whatnot. Yeah, I mean, there'll be one or two here or there, but it's in pop culture, the majority culture is usually these things, teaching children about that mystical occult side as friendly. Usually it's presented as having two sides. There's a light magic and there's dark magic, and you should be on the light magic side instead of saying, well, they're both mistaken. And it comes out from teachings of Carl Jung and his follower, Jordan Peterson, who's very popular right now in teaching about the hero journey or the monomyth. And so what Jung taught to his student, Joseph Campbell, who taught to his student, George Lucas, who put it into the movie Star Wars, was that all religions of the world share one mythology. There's variations, but it's all the same hero journey with the same kind of steps. And so that's what Star Wars, George Lucas wanted Star Wars to be that for the Americans, the monomyth. And so you have very typical heroes that go through spiritual transformation in very typical ways, whereas generally the spiritual transformation is coming to see that all is one. The Sith and the Jedi, well, they're just two sides of the yin yang. All is one. So then skip the Beatles. And so incidentally, sometimes you'll hear Christians get kind of excited about Jordan Peterson because he doesn't say Christianity's false. And so compared to an atheist like Richard Dawkins, they'll say, this is great. A famous intellectual in our day who says Jesus was real, but he means in the sense of the hero story, the hero journey. That's one iteration. He might even say it's the best iteration, but it's just one iteration of that same story throughout the world. And then a really popular example now is Joe Rogan, who talks about his psychedelic trips, and he meets people. He calls them elves, people, I mean, intellectual beings, spirits of some kind, elves or jokers that teach him things using DMT, or they talk about ayahuasca. You have a shaman perform a magical ritual to open you up with this ayahuasca to the other side. You pierce the veil. Now he'll present it as I'm getting access to them, but it could also be I'm giving them access to me. And a lot of people listen to Joe Rogan and say, that's really interesting. Maybe I should try that. So he combines a kind of popular podcast culture with the altered consciousness exploration of Timothy Leary. Not that you use your mind better to understand what you haven't understood, but that you avoid the mind and that level of cognition, and you go to that transcendental mystical state where you're kind of an observer. He describes himself as just an observer seeing things in this other dimension, like jokers, and they're communicating to him. They're mocking him, he said. And he took away from that. They're pointing out I'm too egoistic. I need to be less self-absorbed. There could be other reasons why they're mocking him, but that's what he took, a lesson from them. And then you still see modern astrology, very popular, use of crystals. Sometimes that's made kind of scientific. You have a quartz crystal in your watch. It moves electrons. And so you get it and you wear it as an amulet, and it gives you health. And then on TikTok, you'll see people who will read your fortune, or they'll do a magical ritual for you. You can pay them and they'll do a magical ritual for you on TikTok, right? So kind of connecting up how it's gone from, 1800s level technology to using current technology and using astrology apps. You could do tarot reader apps, trying to manifest things. Let's all think about we'll get 5,000 people on TikTok together on X, and we'll all think of the same thing to try to materialize it in reality. And you have lots of influencers that are promoting this stuff as personalized spirituality over traditional religion, which they'll say is just dry, it's empty, it's hypocritical, it doesn't have life. This spirituality is where you have life. And so that's some of why this has persisted in the United States as people look for alternatives to empty materialism. They look to contacting the dead because they don't accept that death is a separation. They say, I'm not going to accept that. I'll pierce the veil. And it fulfills that psychological need of connection with the dead, or feeling that you know a secret. That's a big one, that no one else knows, or just your group knows this secret. In contrast with revealed religion that says the things we all need to know are made known to everybody, because that's what's important. Is if it's good for you, it should be knowable, and everyone should be able to deal with it and know it. And so they'll usually contrast themselves with reason. That's the right-hand side, rationality. They're the left-hand side, pure intuition or non-cognition, where you're communicated to by this other being. Although once they communicate, once those jokers are pointing at Joe Rogan and laughing, they're communicating a message, which is in the realm of reason. And so we can look at some of the claims and evaluate them as we would any other claim of any other religion. Could these be true, or are they self-contradictory? If they're self-contradictory, they can't be true. Whatever is happening isn't what they're saying is happening. Either, like I said, it could just be grifters. There's things you can know, there's tricks you can learn to trick someone into thinking you're contacting the dead or reading their fortune, and they pay you money. Those are very old. And you get initiated in the sense you become a protege of someone who knows those tricks to use on others. But it could be that they are contacting a spiritual world, but not the one they think. That's also an option. So key historical and cultural developments, invitation to think about how these ideas affects our own current environment, our own current cultural environment, and then some reflection themes where you might look around and see occult symbolism that you hadn't thought of before. I didn't really go over occult symbolism here, but some of it's pretty well known. And I gave the dollar bill as the example, which will help you find other things. On my campus where I work and teach, there is a pyramid without the cap. And it had to be made purposefully. It's in a very obvious place. And I bet most people don't even see it on campus, but it's very clearly, when you look at it and you think about that, is very clearly the pyramid with the all-seeing eye and no top. And it's not a support structure of the building. So it's not like a necessary piece. It was made on purpose to symbolize that. And what does the popularity of those practices say about the current American spirituality? What are they interested in? We didn't go over statistics, but places like the Pew Research look at statistics and they say those who say they're spiritual, which means this stuff, that number is increasing quite a bit. It seems like it may have reversed a little bit. I don't know the 2025 numbers, but this is the study of the occult and New Age with a special look at American culture. Thanks for joining me.